Welcome to High Scary Stories. Tonight we follow fading trails into the deep unknown, where old mines still breathe in silence, where lakes whisper with the voices of the dead, where snow-covered cabins hold secrets in the dark, and where the red mist waits just off the path, patient and alive. These are 4 true tales pulled from the edge of wilderness stories that begin quietly with the crunch of boots on dirt and end with something watching you from the trees. Out here, the woods don't just hide things. They remember, and sometimes they answer back. This is High Scary Stories. Let's begin. Story 1. The Forgotten Mine Beneath Black Bear Ridge. They always said Black Bear Ridge wasn't the kind of place you wandered into by accident. The mountain sat like a silent giant over the Colorado timberline, its slopes steep and scarred from the days when men tried to dig wealth out of its belly. Most of the old mines were sealed shut now, forgotten relics from a time when people believed the land could be tamed. But there was one site in particular the locals never talked about: the Holloway Shaft. Supposedly collapsed in 1911 during a snowstorm, the mine had taken 15 men with it. Some said it wasn't the snow that brought it down, but something darker living beneath. My buddy Travis had always been fascinated by that legend. He was the kind of guy who craved places like that, off-grid, buried in stories, the more cursed the better. So when he found a yellowed survey map showing a trail leading straight to the sealed shaft, he convinced me to go. Said it would be a quick hike, maybe take some photos, prove the thing still existed. I agreed mostly because I didn't want him going alone. I should have listened to that tight pull in my chest as we packed up and headed toward the ridge. It wasn't curiosity that sent us there. It was pride. And pride has a price. The trail up Black Bear Ridge started easy, a dirt path winding through towering spruce and pine, their needles whispering in the morning breeze. At first, it felt like any other backwoods hike we'd done. Birds chirped overhead, and patches of sunlight filtered through the trees in golden streaks. Travis was in his element, grinning as he checked the old map and pointed out landmarks. I tried to match his excitement, but something about the woods felt off. It was subtle at first. No animals, no squirrels darting across the trail, no insects buzzing in the air. Just the sound of our boots on damp earth and our breath as we climbed. About an hour and the trees started to change. The trunks grew denser, their bark darker and flaking like old paint. Branches twisted in unnatural angles, some of them bent toward the trail as if reaching. A low fog began to settle near the ground, clinging to our ankles. I mentioned it to Travis, but he just shrugged it off. Said the ridge had its own weather patterns. I didn't like the way his voice echoed, slightly delayed, like the forest was repeating him a half-second behind. We passed an old wooden sign nailed to a dying tree. The words had faded, but I could still make out the word Holloway, carved deep beneath the peeling paint. It wasn't marked on any current trail map. That's when I noticed the shift in light. It was still morning, but the canopy above seemed thicker here, blocking out the sun. My watch said it was nearly 10, yet it looked like twilight. The silence grew heavier. No birds, no wind, just stillness. Even Travis had stopped talking, his usual stream of commentary gone. He stared straight ahead, gripping the map tighter. I asked him if he was all right, and he nodded, but too quickly, like he hadn't heard me at all. We reached an old mining rail track, half buried in moss. It led off the trail into the woods, vanishing into the fog. According to the map, it was part of the old access line to the Holloway Shaft. Travis looked at me with a grin that didn't quite reach his eye. "This is it," he said, and started walking. I hesitated. There was something about that fog, the way it clung to the rails, the way the trees leaned in, forming a tunnel. But I followed. Maybe it was loyalty, Maybe it was fear of being alone. Either way, I knew we had just stepped into a place no one was meant to return from. And the ridge, Black Bear Ridge, it knew we were there. The rails led us deeper into the woods, the fog thickening around our knees until the forest on either side seemed to vanish completely. It was like walking through a dream, or maybe a memory someone else had forgotten. The farther we went, the colder it got. Not the kind of cold that came with altitude or time of day, but something bone deep and unnatural, the kind that settled into your skin and whispered that you weren't welcome. I zipped up my jacket, but it didn't help much. Travis was several steps ahead, his shoulders tense and hunched like he was pushing through something invisible. The tracks curved slightly and ended abruptly at a mound of collapsed earth and timber. It had once been the mouth of the Holloway shaft. Now it was nothing more than a rotting wooden frame choked by dirt and stone. I expected Travis to stop, maybe take a photo, maybe nod, like he'd proven his point. But he didn't. He dropped his pack and knelt down, brushing aside debris with his hands like he was digging for something. "What are you doing?" I asked. But he didn't answer. Just kept brushing until a hollow sound echoed beneath his palm. He looked up at me, eyes wide with a strange light. "There's a crawl space. It's not sealed." Before I could stop him, he wedged himself into the gap. I shouted after him, panic rising in my throat. He didn't even hesitate. Within seconds, he had disappeared into the earth, his boots the last thing I saw. Then darkness. Silence. I knelt where he'd gone in the opening, just big enough for a grown man to slide through. I hesitated, every nerve in my body screaming to turn around. But I couldn't leave him. The moment I entered the mine, the world changed. The air was thicker, laced with a metallic tang. My headlamp flickered once, twice, then steadied. The walls were close and damp, the ceiling low enough to force a crouch. Somewhere ahead I could hear Travis moving his boots, scuffing rock and wood. I followed the sound through narrow tunnels that felt like they hadn't seen light in 100 years. Then I heard something else. Not footsteps. Breathing. Not mine, not his. Slow, rhythmic, deliberate. I froze. "Travis," I whispered. No answer. The sound grew louder, a low shuffle from around the corner. I turned, raising the flashlight. A figure stood there. It was Travis, or at least it looked like him. Same jacket, same height. But something was off. His back was too straight. His hands hung too low. His skin looked stretched. He didn't speak, just stared. And then he smiled, the slow, unnatural thing that pulled his mouth too wide. I stepped back. My heel hit something metal. I looked down. An old miner's helmet, and beside it, a boot. Still laced, still full. I looked back up. Travis, or whatever it was gone. The tunnel in front of me was empty. But I wasn't alone. Something had followed us into that shaft. Something that remembered the men who had never left. Something that now wore my friend's face. I stood frozen in the tunnel, heart pounding, breath shallow, the miner's helmet still at my feet. The dim light from my headlamp barely cut through the thick, unmoving air. The silence pressed in like a weight, and somewhere deep in the shaft, I heard it again. A dragging sound. Not footsteps, but something heavier. Slower. I wanted to call out for Travis again, but my throat had closed up. My instincts were screaming at me to run, to get out while I still could, but my legs wouldn't move. Then came the voice. It was his voice. Distant at first, echoing off the walls like it came from far below. "Hey man, this is insane. You have to see this." But there was something wrong with the way he spoke. Too calm, too steady, like he was reading lines. The voice bounced through the narrow shafts, growing closer, but I still couldn't see him. I turned slowly, backing up my headlamp, shaking with every tremble in my hands. That was when the beam of light caught something carvings. Dozens of them etched into the stone walls like someone had clawed them with bare fingers. Spirals, eyes, open mouths. The further I went, the more frantic the carvings became, overlapping, bleeding into one another like someone had been trying to write something down in a language they could not remember. Then I saw it. Travis stood at the mouth of a wider chamber, barely illuminated by my light. Only now I could see it wasn't really him. His face was pale, too pale, his skin stretched tightly over sharp bones. His eyes were all wrong, dark, and empty, like mine shafts themselves. His hands hung too low, fingers long and twitching. "You made it," he said softly, though his mouth barely moved. "What are you?" I asked, my voice cracking. He tilted his head, that eerie smile stretching wider. "You wouldn't understand. But we remember." Behind him, I saw movement. The chamber beyond flickered with the shifting of bodies, figures, shadows, faces peering through darkness, some still wearing torn miner's clothing, some barely human anymore. They were waiting, watching, hollow eyes glinting like wet stones. One of them stepped forward, dragging a rusted pickaxe, its chest sunken, its jaw distended into an unnatural grimace. I backed away, stumbling over the old rails. My light caught a bone clean and cracked, wedged between the ties. The air was colder now, so cold I could barely feel my fingers. "You came back," Travis whispered. "Or the thing that had once been him. That's all it ever needed. One of you to return." "What are you talking about?" I managed to say. "The shaft, it's not just a mine. It's a door. We sealed it once, but it doesn't stay shut without sacrifice." It lunged. I turned and ran, my boots slipping on damp stone, lungs burning as I sprinted through the maze of tunnels, no longer caring which way was out, only knowing that if I stopped, I'd never see daylight again. Behind me, the voices rose, screams, whispers, groans of agony, and something worse. Laughter. Laughter that sounded like Travis and like me. As I burst back into the foggy daylight, I collapsed on the forest floor, gasping, clutching my chest. The woods were quiet again. Too quiet. I turned back, and the tunnel was gone. Sealed. Like it had never been opened. But I knew better. It hadn't been the snowstorm that buried those men in 1911. It had been the mountain. And it had just opened its eyes again. I sat on the cold ground just beyond the tree line, shaking and soaked with sweat despite the chill in the air. My headlamp flickered once, then died completely, leaving me with nothing but the gray light of the forest around me. For a long time I didn't move. I couldn't. My mind was still trapped in that tunnel, still hearing the whispers, still seeing Travis, or what used to be Travis, standing there with that awful hollow grin. Every time I blinked, I saw his face again. Not the one I'd known since high school, but the warped thing that wore it, like a loose mask. Eventually, I forced myself to stand. My legs felt like rubber, and every step down the ridge was a blur. The fog had lifted slightly, but the forest remained unnaturally quiet. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my own feet and my ragged breath. When I finally reached the gravel road where we'd parked the truck, it felt like days had passed. Travis's pack was still in the back seat, right where he'd left it. His phone sat on the dash battery, dead. For a second, I considered going to the police, telling someone, anyone, what had happened, but I knew exactly how it would sound. Two guys go hiking. One disappears. The other comes back talking about haunted mines and creatures in the dark. No one would believe me. They'd search the ridge, find nothing, and maybe chalk it up to a fall or say Travis ran off and didn't tell anyone. And maybe in some twisted way, That would be better. Easier than the truth. For a week, I barely slept. I kept hearing that voice in the back of my head repeating those words. It's not just a mine. It's a door. The dreams were worse. Every night I saw the shaft again open and breathing like a living thing. I saw Travis waiting at the edge, smiling, and behind him dozens of eyes glowing faintly in the dark, waiting. Then one night, I woke to find my apartment freezing cold. I live in a small place, no draft, no broken windows, but my breath came out in clouds. I got up, walked to the door, and found a boot print just outside. A single muddy print. Not mine, not recent. The tread was worn smooth, the size too large, the pattern wrong, like something older than any boot should have left. I haven't gone back to Black Bear Ridge. I never will. But I know what I saw, and I know what I heard down there. That shaft wasn't abandoned. It was sealed for a reason. Whatever lives inside it isn't done. It waits for those who forget. It waits for those who wander too far. And sometimes late at night, I swear I can hear something beneath the floorboards. Not the creak of old wood. Something deeper. A low shuffle. A breath. Like something just beneath me. Remembering my name. Story 2. Voices Under the Lake. When my uncle died last fall, he left me a cabin floating on a lake in northern Montana. It was the kind of place that looked peaceful in photos, quiet water, endless trees, and nothing but silence stretching for miles. He used it for fishing, maybe for escaping things he never talked about. Nobody else in the family wanted it. Too remote, too cold, too empty. But I took it. I was burned out grieving and needed space to think after losing my dad that same year. The idea of silence felt like a gift. The cabin sat on a wooden platform anchored to the lake bed, reachable only by a short rowboat tied to a weathered dock. There was no cell service, no internet, and no neighbors. Just a narrow trail through the woods that led to the road and the rest of the world. The first few days were calm. I slept better than I had in months, watched the sunrise through fog curling over the water, and tried to write in my journal again. But on the fourth night, I woke to the sound of someone whispering my name. It came from across the lake, soft and strained, like it had traveled far to find me. I sat up in the dark, listening. Then I heard it again, and this time it was my father's voice. I sat frozen in bed, barely breathing, straining to hear more. The whisper had come again, clearer this time, drifting across the still surface of the lake like mist. My father's voice, the same low tone he used when waking me up gently as a kid. But my father had died 6 months ago. I buried him myself. The cabin was dark, except for the faint blue glow of the moon filtering through the windows. I got up and moved toward the door slowly, quietly, as if any sudden movement might break whatever fragile thing was happening outside. When I stepped onto the small deck that wrapped around the cabin, the night air hit me like a wall, cold and damp, carrying the faint scent of pine. And something else, something faintly metallic. The water was perfectly still, not a ripple, not a bird, not a sound. Then the whisper came again. Come out. It wasn't just my father's voice now. It was layered familiar tones blending into one another like echoes of people I had once known. My uncle, a childhood friend, my mother, all of them gone. Their voices too perfect, too precise, as if something was mimicking them, trying to get it just right, but missing the humanity. I stepped back into the cabin and locked the door. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard footsteps on the deck. Once I swore I saw a shape standing at the edge of the platform just outside the range of moonlight. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It was just there watching. When I turned the lantern on, it was gone. The next morning I convinced myself I had dreamed it all. Maybe grief was catching up with me. Maybe the isolation was playing tricks on my mind. I cleaned the cabin, made breakfast, even paddled across the lake to stretch my legs. The trees were tall and quiet. The trail was still there, overgrown, but familiar. I felt better, grounded. But when I returned, something was different. The front door was cracked open, even though I was sure I'd locked it. Inside, nothing was stolen or broken, but my journal, where I had written about hearing the voices, was sitting open on the kitchen table. The page had been turned. A sentence I hadn't written stood at the bottom, scrawled in a shaky hand. "You remember us." My blood ran cold. I stared at the words for a long time, hoping they would vanish, that I had imagined them. But they stayed. And that night, as the wind died and the lake turned to glass again, I heard my name. And my father's voice, clearer than ever, whispering from beneath the water. That night, I didn't bother trying to sleep. I lit the lantern, pulled a chair into the corner of the room, and sat facing the front door with my back to the wall. The journal was still on the table, its pages unmoved since I found the strange message. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Outside, the lake was dead quiet again, like the water itself was holding its breath. I stared through the small window, watching the mist roll low over the surface, waiting for something to happen. And then it did. Around 2 a.m, I heard a soft knock. Not on the door, but on the side of the cabin, down low near the waterline. 3 slow taps, then silence. I held my breath, listening. Another 3 taps came, this time closer to the window. My heart pounded as I crept over and pulled the curtain back just an inch. There was a figure floating beside the cabin, just the top half visible in the misty dark. A man, his shoulders just above the water, unmoving. He wasn't swimming or treading water. He was just there, held up by something I couldn't see. His head tilted slowly toward the window, as if he knew I was watching. Moonlight reflected off his skin, pale and slick, and in that moment I recognized the face. It was my father. Except it wasn't. The shape was close, too close. But something was wrong with the proportions. The features were there, but stretched, warped, like someone had tried to recreate his face from memory and gotten it almost right. His mouth opened slowly, far wider than any human mouth should, and the voice that came from it was unmistakable. "Come outside. I need to talk to you." I stumbled back from the window, my legs barely holding me upright. The voice wasn't angry or threatening. It was soft, coaxing, gentle in a way that made it worse. My father had never raised his voice. He didn't have to. And now something was using that calm, comforting tone to call me into the dark. The tapping started again, this time all around the cabin. From below, from the deck, from every wall. It was like the lake itself had hands, and they were all reaching out. I grabbed the lantern and backed into the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. The taps didn't stop. They got louder, more urgent, turning into pounding. And then the whispers returned. Voices of people I knew, people I loved, all layered over one another like a broken recording. Some pleading, some laughing, some calling my name over and over in a sing-song rhythm that made my skin crawl. In the corner of the bedroom, the air grew cold. The window fogged from the inside. I stepped closer and saw a message drawn in the condensation with a fingertip. "Let us in." I ran to the far side of the room, dragging the dresser in front of the door. The pounding and voices went on for hours, but they never broke in. They didn't have to, because somewhere deep down, I knew the truth. They weren't trying to hurt me. They were trying to pull me under. The pounding stopped just before dawn. 1 second it was chaos, the walls shaking, the voices pressing in from all sides, and the next silence. Absolute and sudden, like someone had thrown a heavy blanket over the world. The fog outside had thickened, curling in through the cracks in the window frames, seeping beneath the door. I sat there for what felt like hours back, pressed against the wall, eyes locked on the frosted glass where those words had appeared, "Let us in." But nothing moved. Nothing whispered. It was like they were waiting. When daylight finally cut through the haze, pale and watery, I forced myself out of the bedroom. The cabin looked untouched, except for the damp footprints leading across the wooden floor. Bare feet, human-sized. They stopped at the table where my journal still lay open. My hands trembled as I approached it, knowing before I saw it that there would be something new written there. And there was. We remember the promises. I had no idea what that meant. But something in my chest, twisted like a memory I couldn't quite reach, was trying to surface. I shoved the journal into my bag, grabbed what little food I had left, and paddled back to shore. I didn't stop moving until I reached the tree line. The path back to the road felt longer than I remembered, more overgrown, like the forest didn't want to let me go. I called a friend to pick me up. Said I'd had enough of cabin life. Said I just needed to be around people again. That night, in the safety of my apartment 2 towns over, I thought maybe I had imagined it all. That the lake had gotten into my head. That grief, isolation, and too many bad dreams had twisted something inside me. But then my phone rang. It was my dad's number. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, too terrified to answer and too terrified not to. It rang once, twice. Then a voicemail. I played it with shaking fingers. "Hey, kiddo. I'm just outside. Can you come out?" His voice. Exactly as I remembered it. Calm, steady. I checked the peephole. Nothing. But when I opened the door, there was something sitting on the welcome mat. My journal, wet. The pages stuck together. I hadn't brought it with me. I left it in the cabin. The message on the last page was written in what looked like lake water and ash. "You said you'd never leave me behind." Suddenly I remembered. I was 6. The first time my dad took me to that lake. We fished all morning. He told me it was a sacred place. Said his father used to say the lake remembered every voice that touched it. Every promise, every lie. "You belong to the water now." The words echoed in my head, like a curse. I looked down at my hands and noticed the skin was paler, wrinkled, like I'd been underwater for hours. In the silence, I heard my name again. This time not from outside, from beneath the floorboards, calling, waiting. Not angry, not anymore. Patient. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every sound in the apartment felt like it came from beneath me. The creak of the floor, the gentle groan of the pipes, the whisper of wind against the windows. But it wasn't the building that kept me awake. It was the voice. My father's voice. Sometimes it was calling gently, like when he used to wake me for school. Other times it was angry, distorted, filled with static and echoes, like it was being dragged through deep water. I packed a bag the next morning. Not with clothes, not with supplies. Just the journal and the only photo I had left of us together. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. The lake had followed me. Or maybe I had never really left it. The water was inside me now, in the marrow of my bones, in the way my reflection shimmered wrong every time I looked into glass. I drove for hours, taking back roads, losing cell signals somewhere along the border of Idaho. I kept the windows down. I thought maybe the wind would carry away the whispering. But it didn't. It only carried it closer. I stopped for gas in a small town I didn't recognize. The clerk didn't look up, didn't speak, just stared at me with glassy eyes as I paid. On the way out, I glanced at the bathroom mirror in the back of the store. My reflection smiled before I did. That night, I found myself back at the lake. I don't remember driving there. I don't remember turning down the path or dragging the old rowboat out of the brush. But when I looked up, the cabin was there again, sitting still in the middle of the water, like it had been waiting all along. The fog rolled low over the surface, thick and silver under the moonlight. I rowed slowly, each creak of the oars like a heartbeat. When I reached the cabin, the lantern inside was already lit. The door swung open without a sound. My journal sat on the table, the pages turning in a breeze I couldn't feel. The floorboards were wet. I stepped inside and listened. The voice came again. "You came back." This time I answered, "I know." And then the floor beneath me groaned. Slowly, steadily it opened. Not broken, not splintered. Just opened like a mouth long held shut. Water rose around my ankles, then my knees. I didn't move. I didn't fight. I looked down into the dark and saw faces. Not angry, not twisted. Familiar. They looked up at me with hollow eyes that still remembered. I stepped forward, and the water took me. Some nights when the lake is still and the fog is thick, the lantern still glows inside the cabin. And if you listen closely, you might hear someone whispering your name. A voice you know. A voice you miss. Just be careful. It may remember you too. Story 3. The Thing at Frost Hollow. Frost Hollow is one of those places that disappears from the map once winter sets in. Tucked deep in the Alaskan interior, the valley becomes unreachable for weeks at a time when the snow piles high and the roads vanish under white silence. My wife Lena and I bought a small cabin there 2 years ago, thinking it would be the perfect retreat. Quiet, remote, simple. We wanted a place to disconnect from everything and everyone. That winter, the snow came early and heavy. By mid-November, we were snowed in, just the two of us and our 2 dogs, Kiro and Scout. No phone signal, no power grid, just a wood stove, canned food, and the sound of wind moving through frozen trees. At first, it felt like the escape we needed. We read books, played old card games, cooked by lantern light. But around the second week, I started noticing little things. Kiro wouldn't sleep near the door anymore. Scout growled at empty corners. Lena was quieter too. She kept saying it felt colder than it should have been. That the wind sounded wrong at night, like something breathing just outside the cabin walls. Then one night, I woke to find her sitting at the edge of the bed, staring at the window. She didn't say a word, and her reflection in the glass wasn't moving. At first, I thought she was sleepwalking. Lena had never done that before, but it made more sense than anything else. I called her name softly then, again louder. She didn't answer. She just kept staring out the window, motionless. The room was dimly lit by the dying glow of the wood stove, and I could just make out her reflection in the frost-covered glass. That was when I noticed it wasn't her reflection at all. The thing in the window wasn't sitting like she was. It was standing too tall, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its limbs were long, distorted, as if someone had drawn her shape from memory, but stretched it too far. I blinked hard, and when I looked again, it was gone. Just Lena, now still and silent. I reached out, touched her shoulder. She turned to me slowly, eyes wide and dazed like she had been under a spell. She blinked, confused, asked me why I was up so early. It was still the middle of the night. I didn't tell her what I saw. I didn't want to scare her. The next morning, Kiro refused to leave his spot under the bed. Scout barked at the fireplace for nearly 10 minutes straight. Outside, the woods were silent. No birds, no wind. Just the low moan of ice shifting in the trees. I went out to chop more firewood, trying to shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every time I looked up, I expected to see something just beyond the tree line. Something pale, something tall. But there was never anything there. That night, as we sat by the fire, eating canned stew, Lena spoke in a quiet voice. She said she had dreamed someone was watching us through the window. She said it looked like her, but not quite. Like it was trying to mimic her face and didn't understand how. She laughed it off, tried to smile, but I could see the fear behind her eyes. Later, as we lay in bed, I heard footsteps on the roof. Slow, deliberate, not the scattering of snow or the shift of ice. Real steps. I got up, grabbed the old rifle we kept by the door, and went outside, boots crunching in the frozen snow. The roof was empty, nothing but white and shadow. But when I came back in, Lena was standing in the hallway just outside the bedroom door. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me. Then she smiled, a little too wide. She said I was just watching you sleep. But I had been outside, and the bed was still warm. I stared at her, heart pounding, the cold from outside still clinging to my skin. Her voice was soft, warm, exactly the way Lena always sounded. But something in the way she said those words, like she had rehearsed them, made the hairs on my neck rise. She turned and walked back toward the bedroom. Without another word, the long hem of her sweater brushing silently across the wood floor. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what I had just seen. I followed her, slowly, rifle still in my hand. When I stepped into the bedroom, she was already back under the covers, facing away from me, breathing slowly and evenly. I watched her for a long minute, trying to convince myself that I was just rattled, that maybe I had imagined the moment at the door. Eventually, I set the rifle down and climbed into bed beside her. Her skin felt cold. The next day, I checked the roof for footprints. There were none. But at the far end of the cabin, just beneath the overhang near the wood shed, I found something far worse: drag marks in the snow, long and uneven, like someone had been pulled across the clearing and into the trees. The snow was undisturbed all around it. No footprints, no animal tracks, just that trail. I didn't tell Lena. I couldn't. I told myself maybe it had been the dogs. Maybe Scout had dragged a fallen branch or something similar. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had made those marks hadn't walked on two legs. That evening, as we prepared dinner, Lena hummed softly to herself in the kitchen. It was a tune I didn't recognize. The sound was melodic, but slightly off, as though the notes were being forced into place. When I asked her what it was, she paused, blinked slowly, and said she didn't know. She looked confused, then laughed it off, and went back to chopping vegetables. Later, while she slept, I pulled out an old photo album we had brought to the cabin. I needed to see her face, really see it. Compare. Something inside me was begging for proof. I held one of the pictures up in the lamplight and studied it, then turned slowly to look at the woman lying beside me. The photo showed Lena with a small scar on her left cheek. She got it on our honeymoon, slipping on wet rocks near a waterfall in Oregon. The woman beside me didn't have that scar. I didn't sleep that night. Around 3 in the morning, I heard the bedroom door creak open. I kept my eyes closed, barely breathing, as soft footsteps moved across the floor. Then I heard her voice again, low and steady. "You don't have to be afraid of me." I opened my eyes just a sliver and saw her standing beside the bed, watching me. Her face was calm, but her hands twitched at her sides, fingers curling and uncurling like they didn't quite belong to her. She leaned in close, so close I could feel her breath on my face. I'm getting better at being her. And then she smiled, the same too wide smile I had seen the night before. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just lay there, frozen beneath the covers, barely able to breathe, as she stood over me, smiling with a mouth that didn't know how to stop. After what felt like hours, she turned and walked back to her side of the bed, her footsteps perfectly even, perfectly human. The room went quiet again. But I stayed awake, eyes open in the dark, listening for the next wrong thing. At dawn, she was already in the kitchen when I got up. She made coffee, asked about my sleep, laughed at something she read in an old magazine we'd brought along. It was all so normal, so perfectly normal. But that was the worst part. Lena was never a morning person. She always needed time, quiet space to wake. This version of her was rehearsed, like someone had read a list of her habits and was trying them on for the first time. The dogs wouldn't go near her. Scout whined whenever she entered the room. Kiro refused to eat unless I stayed nearby. That afternoon, while Lena chopped wood behind the cabin, something she had never done before, I took Scout for a walk along the edge of the tree line. That's where I found it. A body, half buried beneath snow and leaves, lying twisted near the base of a tree. It was Lena, or what was left of her. Her jacket was the same, her boots, that same scar on her cheek. Her skin was pale lips, blue eyes open wide in a frozen expression of terror. My stomach twisted, and I dropped to my knees beside her. It hadn't been long, 2, maybe 3 days. But I knew. I knew the thing sleeping in the cabin beside me wasn't her. I stumbled back through the snow, heart racing, mind reeling. When I returned, the cabin was quiet. Too quiet. The fire was out. The windows were fogged. The dogs were gone. Inside, Lena stood by the wood stove, hands clasped in front of her, smiling. She looked calm, peaceful even. But her eyes didn't blink. "I saw you out there," she said. "Did you find what you were looking for?" I didn't answer. I reached for the fireplace poker, slowly, carefully. Her head tilted, curious, like she wasn't sure what I was doing. "You know," she said, stepping closer, "this would have been easier if you hadn't noticed. If you just kept pretending." The voice cracked near the end, like something straining beneath the surface. She twitched once, then again. Her fingers stretched too far, too fast. Her smile widened, tearing slightly at the corners of her lips. I raised the poker. She didn't flinch. "I'm not done learning," she whispered. And then she lunged. I swung hard, catching her, know it, across the temple. The body crumpled to the floor, limbs twisting unnaturally, bones popping where they shouldn't. I backed away, breathing hard, eyes locked on the thing that had worn my wife's face. It didn't bleed, it just twitched. Then it laughed, low and gurgling, before going still. I grabbed the dogs, the emergency bag, and didn't look back. I ran through the snow until my lungs burned, and the cabin was no longer visible behind me. But even now, days later, back in town, I see her face every time I close my eyes. And sometimes when I pass a mirror, I catch a glimpse of her smile. Not on my face. Behind me. I didn't tell the authorities the full truth. I said my wife had gone missing during the storm, that I found remains near our cabin, and panicked. I told them we had been isolated, snowed in, and that I hadn't been thinking clearly. I said the cold had gotten to me, exhaustion, grief. They accepted the story easier than I expected, maybe because it was the kind of explanation that made sense on paper. No one asked about the other version of Lena. No one asked what I really saw in those final moments. They recovered her body, or what was left of it. The medical examiner said exposure and a head injury, blunt force trauma, probably from a fall. That was their best guess. I didn't argue. I signed the forms, answered the questions, and went home. Alone. I've been staying in a small rental house in Anchorage ever since, trying to convince myself it's over. The dogs won't leave my side, especially Scout. He sleeps at the door every night, ears twitching at the slightest sound. At first, I thought he was just traumatized. Now I'm not so sure, because the noises started again last week. Soft tapping at the windows, barely audible at first, just a few gentle knocks. The first time I heard it, I froze. The second time, I grabbed the poker I had brought back with me from Frost Hollow and stood by the door until sunrise. But nothing was there. Just snow and the tracks of something that hadn't walked. It had dragged. And then 3 nights ago, I found the mirror in the bathroom fogged over, even though I hadn't taken a shower. There was a word traced in the condensation, written in a finger I never saw, almost. I scrubbed it off, but it came back the next morning. Almost her. I don't know what that thing was, what it wanted, or how long it had been watching us before it stepped into Lena's skin. I only know it tried to become her, to replace her completely, and for a while it almost worked. And now, wherever it is, I think it's still learning, still practicing, waiting for someone new to believe it. Some nights I wake to the sound of Lena's voice calling my name from the hallway. It's always the exact same tone she used when she needed me. Calm, patient, familiar. But when I check, there's no one there, just the mirror, fogged again. Last night I stood in front of it and asked, "What are you?" And the condensation slowly formed 3 more words, each letter perfect. You know me, so I stay awake. I leave the lights on. I talk to the dogs so I can hear a real voice. But I don't look too long into the mirrors now, because I'm not sure which face will be looking back. Story 4. Red Mist Trail. The first time I saw the red mist, I thought it was just wildfire smoke. I was hiking through Redwood National Park, deep in the old growth trails where the trees tower above you like ancient gods, and cell signal is just a rumor. I had planned the trip alone, needing time away after a rough breakup and a job that felt more like slow suffocation. The trail I chose was unofficial, marked only by a faded wooden arrow nailed to a leaning tree. Locals called it the Red Mist Trail, though I had never found it on any map. That should have been my first warning. The air changed as soon as I stepped onto it. The silence was heavier. The sun barely reached the forest floor, and the trees looked older here, thicker, their bark dark and cracked like old leather. But I kept walking. I told myself I needed this. Solitude. Time to think. About 2 miles in, I saw it. A low fog crawling between the trees stained a deep rust red. It hung close to the ground, thick and unmoving, and gave off a faint scent like wet metal. I hesitated, but something about the way it shimmered in the light drew me in. And then I heard a voice from the mist. It was my own, calling me deeper. I stood still, listening. The voice that echoed through the trees was unmistakably mine. Same pitch, same rhythm, same subtle scratch in the throat. But it sounded distant, like it had been recorded and played back through layers of static. I called out just once, hoping it was some weird acoustic effect. Maybe the trees were bending sound in strange ways. But the voice didn't answer this time. Only silence followed, and the red mist swirled slightly, as if stirred by something moving just beneath its surface. I should have turned back. Every instinct in my body told me something wasn't right. But curiosity can be louder than fear, especially when you're alone and already carrying the weight of too much silence. I stepped into the mist, It was colder than I expected. The moment the haze touched my skin, it felt like stepping into water, wet, heavy, clinging to every pore. The scent was stronger now, metallic and sharp like old blood and rusted iron. The trees around me faded into vague silhouettes, and the trail vanished under my feet. I kept walking, unsure why. My thoughts grew fuzzy, like my mind was being wrapped in cotton. I could hear footsteps beside me, soft and steady, keeping pace with mine. But when I turned, nothing was there. Just trees shifting like shadows, and the red fog that grew thicker with every step. Then I began to see shapes. At first, they were nothing more than faint outlines, figures standing motionless between the trunks. Some tall, others hunched or crooked, their features lost in the haze. I called out again. The voice that answered wasn't mine this time. It was my mother's. She had died 2 years ago. She whispered my name with the same affection she always used, the same lilt in her tone that made my chest ache. I turned toward the sound, stumbling through brambles and roots. I saw her standing there, half-formed in the mist, her arms outstretched like she used to do when I was a child. Her smile was wrong, though. Too wide, too still. I blinked, and she was gone. The shapes around me had moved closer. I hadn't heard them move, but they were no longer distant. They stood in a circle, now half visible through the mist, their bodies unmoving, their heads tilted in unison, watching. Panic began to rise. I turned in place, trying to find the trail, any landmark, anything familiar. But the fog had erased everything. The forest groaned behind me, a deep, low sound, like trees bending under pressure. Then somewhere ahead, my voice returned closer this time. It said quietly, almost gently, "You shouldn't have stepped off the path." That was when I realized something I hadn't noticed before. The red mist wasn't just fog. It was alive. The moment I understood that the mist was alive, everything shifted. The air thickened, not just with moisture, but with intent. The kind of pressure you feel when someone stares too long without blinking. The shapes around me no longer felt distant or passive. They were waiting. I tried to back away, retrace my steps, but the fog had already rearranged the forest. Every tree looked the same. Every sound came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then something moved. It stepped out from behind the nearest trunk with a slow, deliberate gait. At first it looked like a person, a man maybe wearing a torn jacket, skin gray and too smooth as if it had been poured over bones instead of grown. Its eyes were dark hollows, and its mouth hung open in a silent scream. It took another step, and I realized it was imitating the way I walked. Every limb moved with unnatural precision, like it had studied me too long and still hadn't figured out how to be human. I turned and ran. Branches whipped against my face, roots caught at my ankles, but I pushed through. The red mist made it hard to see, and every few feet I thought I heard my own footsteps repeating behind me just a second too late. I stumbled into a small clearing where the air seemed thinner, more breathable. I bent over, gasping, trying to collect myself. Then I heard voices, dozens of them, all speaking in unison. They were speaking as me. Every word I had muttered since I entered the mist echoed back at me from the trees. Things I had whispered to myself in doubt, Things I had thought in fear, things I never said aloud. It was like the fog had been listening, memorizing. It wasn't trying to scare me with monsters. It was trying to become me. A low hum began to rise from the ground, vibrating through my boots. I looked down and saw the mist seeping from the soil now, not just hanging in the air, but bleeding up like smoke from a dying fire. My vision swam. The figures were back closer this time, their limbs longer heads, tilted mouths opening wider with each breath. And then I saw one standing only 10 feet away. It looked exactly like me. Same clothes, same posture, same tired expression. But its eyes were empty, glossy and still like wet marbles shoved into its skull. It didn't move. It just stood there breathing, with my rhythm matching every twitch in my hands. I whispered, "What do you want?" Its mouth moved, but no sound came out. Then slowly, like a puppet pulled on strings, it raised its hand and pointed to my chest. I looked down. There was a faint glow beneath my shirt, a soft, red light pulsing through the fabric like a heartbeat. My heart. It was mimicking that too. When I looked back up, the figure was gone. So were the others. The clearing was empty, but the mist still pulsed warm now, wrapping around my legs like fingers. That was when I knew I wasn't being hunted. I was being prepared. I tried to move, but the mist clung to me like a second skin, tightening around my ankles with each passing second. The warmth wasn't comforting anymore. It felt like being held in the grip of something that had waited far too long. I stumbled backward, trying to break free, and finally tore myself from the clearing. My legs felt numb, like they didn't quite belong to me. I kept running, not toward anything, just away deeper into the trees, hoping distance would shake whatever was crawling into my skin. As I ran, the voices returned. Not whispered now. Loud, clear. And they were arguing. They all sounded like me. Some screamed in panic. Some cried. Others spoke calmly, guiding me like a second conscience. Turn left. Watch your step. Stop running. They overlapped in a horrible chorus until I couldn't tell which thoughts were mine anymore. One voice cut through them all. Deeper. Stronger. You were never meant to leave. The trail opened suddenly, and I found myself standing before a massive redwood split down the middle by time and lightning. Inside its hollow trunk was a dense pool of the red mist swirling upward like smoke from a burning altar. It shimmered with movement, shifting shadows that looked like faces, arms, pieces of people I'd seen in the fog. I knew I should run, but my body betrayed me. My feet moved forward on their own, one step at a time, drawn like iron to a magnet. The mist inside the tree began to shape itself. Limbs reached out. And then from within, something stepped forward. It was me again. But this time it was perfect. Same clothes, same hair, same face, even the small scar on my eyebrow from when I was 6. It smiled. My smile. It spoke. You left the path. That's all it ever needed. I tried to step back, but the mist tightened behind me like a wall. The double stepped closer, tilting its head with quiet curiosity. It wasn't threatening. It was calm, studying me the way a craftsman studies their subject. You made it easy, it said. You told us everything. Every doubt, every fear, every memory. Faces began to form in the mist behind it. My mother, my ex, friends I hadn't seen in years, all standing in the fog, expressionless, watching. You were meant to stay, the double whispered. So we could become. I raised my hands instinctively to push it away, but it didn't flinch. Instead, it stepped into me, not with violence, but with ease, like smoke filling a room. My mind fractured. I felt every part of myself being stretched, copied, rewritten. I saw flashes, moments from my life. I had forgotten memories twisted and reshaped as the things sifted through them. It wasn't taking over. It was duplicating, replacing. And then I was outside the clearing again, gasping, alone. The red mist was gone. The trees silent, my body intact. But I didn't know if I was the one who walked away, or if I was the one left behind. The ranger found me walking along the edge of the main trail just before sunset, covered in dirt, my clothes damp with dew and fog. I couldn't tell him where I'd been or how long I'd been gone. My watch had stopped. My phone wouldn't turn on. I must have looked half feral, stumbling out of the woods like something barely human. He kept asking me if I was lost, if I needed medical attention. I just nodded and let him guide me back to the ranger station. They said I'd been missing for 2 full days. Search parties had already gone out. They were preparing for the worst. But when I tried to explain what happened about the red mist, the voices, the double, I stopped myself. I didn't know how to describe it without sounding insane. And deep down, I wasn't sure I had escaped at all. I stayed in town that night, unable to sleep. Every time I looked in a mirror, I checked for something wrong in my reflection. Something too still, too smooth, something that blinked just a second too late. But everything looked normal. I looked normal. I felt normal. At least I did at first. But small things started to change. I began finishing strangers' sentences before they spoke, remembering dreams that weren't mine. One night, I walked past a family on the sidewalk and called their child by name before they introduced him. I couldn't explain how I knew. Then the dreams began. Red mist curling beneath my bed, trees pressing in from the walls, a voice, my voice speaking from just behind my head, telling me to come back, telling me it was time. I'd wake up with soil under my fingernails and no memory of leaving my room. I tried to talk to someone once, a therapist in a nearby city. I told her I felt like I had brought something back with me from the woods, that something else might have walked out wearing my skin. She smiled politely, nodded, wrote notes. But near the end of the session, she paused and said almost absent-mindedly, "You're doing very well for someone who was replaced." She didn't realize what she'd said. Or maybe she did. I left that same night. Now I keep to myself. I avoid trails, avoid mirrors. I don't let anyone get too close. But sometimes when the light hits just right, I see movement in the reflections. Not me, not exactly, but something close. Watching. Waiting. And once, just once, I heard my own voice outside my apartment window at night. It whispered, "We were perfect." That's when I knew the truth. Maybe I did escape. Or maybe I'm just what the red mist left behind. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.